Listeners, could we be any more excited? Yes, in a week packed with stories covering every range of emotion, it's left us craving for a new episode almost as much as Blackpool's Ross Geller craves his beers. We may have been on a break, but today we bring you a story that will lift you just as high as doppelganger David lifted his crate of beverages for the CCTV camera. Whether it's storytelling or a proper look at the news, we'll be there for you. Welcome to SportSpiel. Yes, hello everyone, welcome to episode 30 where I am here, Will Moulton is here, hello across the table.
Good morning/afternoon.
Afternoon now. And well, what do you know, sitting with us at the table, it's only our guest from episode 5, Niki Kovacs.
Hi everyone.
How are you? It's been a while since we last heard from you on this podcast.
Yeah, things have been good. It's pretty cold out today. Winter's upon us. Not a fan.
I blame the
Scenic
construction
backgrounds.
workers for doing all that work in the cafe.
Yeah, the construction work inside King's Place is still going on, so we've come outside to this sort of canal boat parking area. It's very scenic.
There are lots of moorhens.
And a lot
Very
of more
pretty.
It is. So yeah, in terms of cycling, since it's not often that we get a chance to sit down with someone who does sport live when we're recording this, it was June 2017, by the way, that your episode was aired.
Wow, okay,
which,
that's quite a while.
we're in October 2018 now,
Yeah.
what's happened to you in that time?
Well, I've just been racing.
Anywhere people will have seen you? Hit the track?
I have been doing some fixed crits, which has been interesting, and I've been doing track, and that's pretty much it. I've just finished Derby Nationals, and now I am chilling out.
That's always good. So, across from the table from me, you. How have you been this week?
Yeah, I've
How's
been
life?
good. Since we last recorded, we went back to News Associates, didn't we? Had
Yes.
a good chat with some very switched on young journos, some really positive podcast ideas they came up with. It was nice to go back. We've got a present. Alasdair forgot to bring it today, so we don't know what it is.
Yes.
But
Thanks to the
Surprise.
people at News Associates who had a present for us, forgot to give it to us while we were there, mailed it to me, and then I've forgotten to bring it here. So apologies for that.
yeah, so a few good podcast ideas that we heard there. A couple of them launching this week, so we'll make sure to direct our listeners towards them. So
Yes.
spread the pod love. Everyone has a listen.
It's what we do, isn't it? So, on today's show, we have another cracking interview to start with. More on that in a mo. And in part 2, we have the news roundup, and we also have our discussion section, which this week focuses on rugby winger Christian Wade and his decision to quit the sport to try and make it in American football. All that is to come, but first, it is feature interview time, and as people may have seen on social media, Niki is not only here in a guest presenter capacity, she's here as a interviewer on the show. And this week, you interviewed Ryan Anderton. So, before we launch into the interview, what can people expect?
So basically, Ryan has been cycling around the whole of the UK, and he is funding raising funds for Mind UK, and it's through a campaign which he's launched himself called ReCycleYourself, and it's all to raise awareness and around depression and how you can use cycling as a tool in order to better yourself and help your condition. Okay, hi everybody. Today I'm speaking to Ryan, and he's launched a Recycle Yourself campaign, which is raising money for Mind. I don't know if you all know about it, but Mind is a charity that deals with depression, and Ryan is going to attempt to cycle around the whole circumference of Britain in 21 days. And by doing this, he's hoping to raise at least about £1,000. So all of this is self-funded by Ryan, and we're just going to find out what his plans are, because it's quite a big challenge. Okay, Ryan, so great. Would you like to tell us how you came into cycling, and how you, the challenges you face? Because I know you had quite a difficult kind of time over the past few years, and you've found some really creative solutions to help you?
Yes, yeah. In 2010, I after a relationship breakup, I went to Blackpool and had what I consider to be my first real sort of suicide depression episode, and that's carried on for quite a while with insufficient help from sort of like the NHS and not knowing where else I could sort of turn to. And then 2 years ago, I again had another episode of depression and suicide, and that led me to a charity group called Andy's Man Club. There I met a group of guys who talk about their problems and opened up. One of those was a cyclist, Jamie, and he said that he used cycling as his wellbeing tool. And at that time I was cycling to and from work, which is about 20 miles a day. And it all really started from there. I then we did a Andy's Man Club charity ride, which was around the groups in the north of England. And I did a British Red Cross charity ride. And then last year I did Land's End to John O'Groats. And my passion for cycling from there has just grown and grown, to the extent where now this year I'm cycling around Britain, like you said, 4,802 miles, aiming to do it in 21 days, which would beat Nick Sanders' record that he set in 1984. Awesome. And I'm doing that for Mind, which is a UK mental health charity which has got offices all around the UK.
Okay, brilliant. So just to touch on where you said the NHS couldn't help you, is that because they didn't have the resource or the funding, or what were your experiences of that?
I think with the NHS for myself is I didn't want to take medication. So the NHS particularly are a little bit more focused on the prescription side of treatment. They do have like home treatment teams that come out and see you, but everything else that I require for my mental health, like my cycling and my wellbeing tools and the peer support groups, like Andy's Man Club, and there's another one called Missing Peace that I attended, they were what worked for me, not the medication. So whilst you turn to your doctor for help, that type of help that the NHS provided wasn't for me. So the charitable sector has been where I found more resources to help cope with my depression. Okay,
so I completely understand. It's so hard to talk about, and thank you for being so open with everybody. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, how did you find what worked for you best? Was it trial and error? And, did you find things like psychotherapy or kind of, like a more like CBT type route was better suited for you? And how did you find that out? Was it quite difficult, or did it come quite naturally?
No, my treatment and finding what worked for me for my mental health has taken 8 years to find out what worked and find out what resources were available to me. So I initially went through the NHS route. So I had psychotherapy appointments, I took my medication, and I was having quite regular visits at home. But what I found with that is that it was quite what I call textbook treatment. And it was a lot of questions, and it was a lot of repetition because there was change of people, change of staff that came to visit me, whereby when I finally found the peer support groups, the communication was a lot more open. There was people there that understood what I was going through because they'd gone through them themselves. And so that speaking to people that understood made me feel like I wasn't alone. It wasn't just me and the NHS. It was me and hundreds of other people that had similar other problems.
And
So that's where my route away from the NHS helped me find a better form of recovery.
did you find these other methods had a... Do you think it was like the level of consistency, working with, like the same people, seeing the same people? Do you think that's an element that helped you?
Yeah, it was the same people. So I made friends through doing it. It wasn't me and a professional. It was a circle of friends and a support that I could almost rely on at any point in any day. So if I was struggling at 2:00 in the morning, there'd be somebody else there that through Facebook or through a quick text message I could just speak to, whereby with the NHS you've got to be referred, or you've got to wait until the doctors are open in the morning. It just didn't have the same urgency, I suppose, and the same care that a lot of the people that became my friends could offer me.
So I think the fact that there is a social element to it is probably helpful in itself. Would you agree with that statement, or?
Absolutely, 100%. Earlier on this year, in February, my Uncle Paul, he passed away whilst he was on a mental health ward.
Oh, I'm sorry
And
to hear that.
I've had sort of discussions with his daughter, my cousin, and we feel that he lacked a social support group. And he felt sort of very isolated. So the peer support aspect and having people around you that understand and are also going through their own problems often does help in a quicker and more effective recovery.
Do you think the experience you had, the unfortunate experience you had with your uncle, do you think that helped you turn towards a more social option? Do you think you would have considered that before?
It was always something that we did try and encourage him to do, but with the sort of social anxiety and the form of depression and mental health that he had, he struggled to maintain relationships, I suppose, with people. You tend to quite often let people down, and that led to him not being able to. But I think if he had have been able to have that support a little bit more consistently, and maybe not go down as much of the medication route as he did, he would have had a better mental health.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think, I completely understand how difficult this must be for you, but I'm thinking that this is going to be helping a lot of listeners out there. So thank you for being so brave and for being so open and honest with everybody. So if we speak about your challenge that you're going to be doing, so
yes.
You got into cycling through one of your support groups, and after that, do you think cycling became like a bit of an addiction? Because it sounds like like in a positive way, because cycling gives you so many positive aspects, and British cycling have been talking about depression, so I think it's the kind of sport where it's starting to be recognised as a tool for depression. Why do you think that is?
For me personally, there's a lot of aspects of cycling that appeal to me. One is the physical element. When I was younger, I played quite a lot of football. As I've got older, I can no longer maintain that level of performance. But you can move towards cycling and still get that physical exertion kick that you had from a different sport at a little earlier point in life. But then when you go towards the sort of medical and mental health side of cycling, it's proven that exercise releases endorphins and increases your serotonin levels within your body, which help you feel better. And in a way, that replaces your antidepressants. So if you can get out cycling, then naturally you will feel better. But I like to escape away from my problems and then come back to them. So the fight and flight issue with me is I run away and then I come back again. And cycling allows me to do that. It allows me to go out and see the world, have a little bit of time and exercise that all makes me feel better, and then come back and realise that I can now deal with my my mind or the problem that I have that's starting to get me down.
So would you say cycling is almost like a form of meditation for you? It gets you outside. It's sometimes it can be social, sometimes you can do it in isolation. It gives you that option, whereas with other sports, potentially you don't have that level of freedom.
No, you don't. When you play football on a Saturday or a Sunday morning, and you might go training on a Wednesday night. But with cycling, you can cycle to work in the morning. You can cycle on your lunch hour. You can cycle after work. If you don't work, you can cycle throughout any point of any day. And then there's group rides on a Monday night, on a Wednesday night, on a Sunday, on a Saturday. Through various clubs. You can almost pick and choose and cycle as and when you like.
I think in the UK we're quite lucky in terms of some of the infrastructure, not all of it obviously, but in terms of cycling being quite accessible. So would you say it was quite easy for you to get into, or did you find it quite hard?
I found cycling really easy to get into. Initially I bought a second-hand bike off my dad, and then sort of slowly started to upgrade my bike and my equipment as I got more and more serious into cycling, to the extent now where I have pretty much everything I need. But to start with, you don't need to have the full lycra suits and the clip-in shoes. You literally just need two wheels, a pedal, a seat and a handlebar, and that will enable you to get a feel of whether cycling is for you.
You don't need anything fancy, do you? You don't need like a fancy bike. You don't need anything crazy, because I remember using some really old kits and racing on that, and some of the bikes I've worked on have just been made up of scrap parts, and it's all been perfectly fine. So I think that's potentially something quite important for somebody new to cycling to remember, is not to get caught up in the hype.
Yes, there can be a little bit of an element of snobbery when it comes into cycling, and some people do have £10,000 bikes and they have all the kit and everything. But you've got to remember why you are cycling for me, and cycling for me makes me feel better. So all that other stuff doesn't really interest me. I don't care about the brands and about this, that and the other. It's just about how cycling makes me feel. Whether you own your own bike or whether you use like the Yorkshire Bank bike libraries, which are available around where I live, and you can hire them for a few hours, then cycling's just so easy. It is easy to get into.
Because there's Barclays bikes, or otherwise known as Boris bikes. There's OVO bikes.
Yes.
There's lots of different options where you can just rent a bike and jump on and give it a go. So I think in terms of infrastructure, in that sense, it's very accessible. Did you find riding on the roads quite scary when you first started?
No, not really. Living in Yorkshire and having like the Tour de Yorkshire visit quite regularly now, and the Tour de France came through, I think in most areas of Yorkshire, the drivers are quite tolerant and aware of how dangerous cycling can be. So I praise a lot of the drivers around Yorkshire. I watch a lot of videos of cycling in London and other cities where it can be a little bit more busy and a little bit more hustle and bustle. But where I am, I've found cycling on the road to be extremely safe, and I've had one or two near misses. But you have that whether you're trying to cross the road or whether you're trying to cycle down the road.
Yeah, you just never know. You could be on a bus, you could be on a train. It's just one of those things, isn't it? It's
It
it's
is.
not in your control, so you can't really let that limit you.
No, not at all.
So, speaking about your ride around England, you've mentioned the distance. So, what is the distance you need to cover per day in order to achieve your goal?
If you break 4,802 miles down over 21 days, it works out as an average of just over 228 miles per day.
Which is a heck of a lot. So, in terms of riding time, how many hours per day do you think you'll be riding?
Throughout my training, I've been trying to pace myself so that all my rides are around about the 14, 15 mile per hour mark. So breaking that down, it works out at around about 16 hours cycling per day. And I'm aiming to rest for maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes every 70 miles. So it'll be like an 18-ish hour day, with hopefully about 6 hours sleep in a tent, and then repeat.
So, how is something like this different to something like transcontinental or, a heavy endurance race?
And the transcontinental tends, first and foremost, to be supported. They tend to do it as a team with backup. I'm doing mine solo. I'm on a very strict sort of in and out route where transcontinental, you've got a little bit of variation in where you can head off. But they also do take it a little bit further extreme-wise in that they will cycle for days and then rest, where I'm aiming to sort of have a little bit more structure, a little bit more sleep. Because I'm doing it unsupported, I feel that I need to take that time to recover more.
So you've got a very small margin for error, and the other thing is, how are you funding this?
The ride has been almost completely self-funded. I've got a few family and friends that have contributed to equipment, and 2 or 3 sponsors that have donated a cycling jersey and cycling shorts to get their brand awareness out there and to help me, I suppose. But other than that, yeah, it's myself, family and friends.
Which is really noble, because that means that every cent, pence, different country, every pence that you raise is going straight towards Mind.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that I sort of looked at it as I'm buying equipment for my future well-being. The tent that I'll be using, I can use again. The cycling shorts, the upgrades to the bike, they will all help me in regards to doing further cycling. So I almost felt like it was unfair to be able to go to Mind and say, can you help fund me upgrading my bike so I can do something for you? Because it benefits me as well.
And what are your plans? So you start on this week, Monday. When I looked at your Strava, it looks like you're flying at the moment, because I could see a lot of PRs, personal records. So that's really promising. How do people follow what you're doing?
So there is my Strava account, so you can go onto Strava and search for ReCycleYourself. I've also got Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts, which I will be regularly updating through a friend who's helping me with my social media. And if you search for hashtag Ryan Rides Around Britain, that generally is the easiest way to find it. You can find it under ReCycleYourself as well.
So previously, I think you mentioned that you're going to have 2 Strava accounts, and one of them might have GPS.
Yes, I've got a second Strava account which is just under my own name, and with that one I am solely trying just to map an outline of Britain. So that will be subject to GPS working across the UK, and that will have an overall map of Britain.
Okay, that sounds really awesome as well.
It's just a little bit of it'd be quite good to have. I think I'd be one of the very few people in the country, if not only, that would have a ride that goes all the way around the coast.
one of the other things I wanted to ask you was, in terms of tools that you recommend for other people that are going through difficult times, like like you were, what do you recommend? Do you recommend meditation? Do you recommend yoga, reading, walks in the park? I mean, like, what do you find works as a tool set?
For me, I find a regular routine works quite well. So simple things like getting out of bed and making it, getting a shower, having a shave, making yourself presentable instantly makes you feel a little bit better about yourself.
There's that famous statement of, if you do one thing per day, it's to make your bed, right?
Yes, you have a small sense of achievement just by doing something instantly when you wake up. And it's always nice to get into a made bed at the end of the day, where a lot of people who suffer from depression and anxiety and other forms of mental health tend not to have that routine of going to bed at a correct time. They tend to either stay in bed later and go to bed later. So if you can get up, make your bed, then you're more likely to want to go to bed later on in the night, is the psychology, I believe, behind it. But then when I go to bed on a night, I do listen to meditation. There's a few 8-hour mindfulness and motivational, or you can use it for anxiety and depression. There's a whole host of videos available on YouTube that I do listen to on a night. And again, that's part of my routine. You have a few moments of actually listening to the voice of the gentleman who does the mindfulness technique. The rest of it is sort of subliminal throughout the night. You're just taking it in whilst you're sleeping, and it helps me get to sleep. Whether I take in all the messages throughout the night, I'm not 100% sure of, but it does help me.
So, what other tools do you use? Do you find diet helps?
Well, I've found. Well, personally, cycling obviously is my best well-being tool, and when I feel low, or I feel like I'm not quite being my best self, I will go out cycling. But that's because I can't read. I don't like reading. It doesn't tick a box for me. I'm no good with my fingers, so I can't do knitting. I don't particularly like walking or running, but I think that there's so many things out there that people find as hobbies, and should therefore use them as a little bit more of a mindfulness tool, and sort of take them moments to say, yes, I'm reading, but I'm not just reading, I'm taking time out for me, and really appreciate that time of when you're doing your hobbies. The only other thing to take on top of that, and I'm not particularly great at it, because I'm trying to take on as many calories as I can at the moment, because I fear that I'm going to burn quite a lot of them off, is healthy eating. I think if you put good food inside you, you do feel better. It's quite easy in today's world to take on a junk food and a quickly processed diet. But again, taking that time out to sort of slowly and appreciate the time that it does take to cook a good meal, and then sort of mindfully being aware that you are eating better, psychologically does make you feel better.
So it's part of that whole taking time for yourself, looking after yourself, doing what's good for you.
Yes.
So
yeah, physical and mental health both take time and effort and a little bit of dedication. So if you can put in that little bit of time for you, whether it be for your physical exercise or for your mental strength and well-being, that can only improve how you feel as a person.
And in terms of organisations, I know we've mentioned Mind. There's Samaritans in extreme cases. If you're really struggling, then somebody can call Samaritans at, I think it's any point of the day. And you've mentioned some other smaller charities which have helped you. Do you want to mention them again?
Yeah, there's Missing Piece, which is local to me, which is just a small little charity, which is run by a friend of mine who's also had quite a difficult time over quite a few years. And Andy's Man Club effectively changed my life. Andy's Man Club's a male mental health group, which was set up by former rugby player Luke Ambler. He played for Halifax and Leeds, because his brother-in-law committed suicide completely out of the blue. And it's now got groups all over the UK. I think there's 3 or 4 in Scotland, 1 in Wales, 1 in Devon, quite a few spread across the middle of England, in Halifax, Leeds, Bradford, Huddersfield, and yeah, going from strength to strength, and it's really, really helped me.
Okay, great. So what are your plans after you finish your 21 days? Are you going to still raise money for Mind, or how long can people donate towards Mind for?
So I should finish my ride on the 4th of November. It's my birthday on the 7th of November, and then we will be leaving the fundraising page open probably until the end of November, and so that will allow for anything that sort of needs to be done after the race. There's been quite a lot of interest from media and newspapers, etc. So we will allow for that awareness. And yeah, from there on, I'm looking to do a lot more with Mind when I have a little bit more free time and I'm not as dedicated to my training as I have been over the last few months.
I think, I would like to thank you for being so open again. I know I keep saying it, but it's such a difficult thing to do. Like talking about something so personal, especially with yourself and also with your uncle and your, everything you've gone through. So thank you so much for helping others with this amazing journey. And, if you manage to get this, you could end up getting a world record. So I think it's a win-win either way.
Yes, absolutely. I think personally for myself, there's a massive achievement that comes out of this. For Mind, there's been great awareness so far, and hopefully that will just continue over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And like you say about talking about your mental health, I think that the more people that are open and honest and talk about how they feel, the better that will be for the stigma of mental health, and that will enable more people to utilise the services of Mind and other mental health services without feeling like they are a burden or that there's anything wrong with that. I think that we all have a brain, and therefore we all potentially are going to struggle at some point.
Well, thank you so much for being so open and honest, and for taking the time. I know you've got so much prep work to do before you go off and ride on Monday.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so look forward to following your progress and, seeing all your social. I see you've been doing some like Insta stories and live updates, so it's going to be really exciting to watch, and we're all rooting for you.
Thank you.
You're going to do absolutely awesome. You're going to smash it. You're absolutely flying. That's what Strava says. So
yes,
good luck. And
thank you very much, Niki.
And happy birthday for when you get back.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Niki. Take care.
Okay.
You're listening to SportSpiel, available on Audio Boom, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. A big thank you to Ryan from all of us here on the show, and I speak on behalf of us all around the table when I say good luck with what remains of the cycle. Your legs must be absolutely knackered by now, but we arrive at part 2 of the show, which kicks off with the news roundup section, where the three of us, we've all got news stories that we think people should know about. It ranges from big news headlines to headlines that may have gone under the radar a little bit, and just like we did on the last episode, we will take it in turns to go through our topics, where we have an upper time limit of 2 minutes to actually speak about it. So as ever, Will is on the stopwatch.
Duck timer is at the ready, and I won't tell it to shut up this week.
So the first person to take their turn at going through their news story on this section will be Will Moulton this time around. So, fire away.
So first of all, let's start on a really positive note, and this week saw the 4th instalment of the Invictus Games taking place in Sydney, and my word, some of the stories that have come out of that have just been truly awe-inspiring. Obviously, you know, these guys are there to compete for medals, but the main thing is it's showcasing just how powerful sport can be in the recovery after such traumatic incidents that these guys have suffered while serving their countries. So one that really stood out for me was Debbie O'Connell, who actually was injured when she fell off her horse, as she was part of the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. Fell off her horse, broke her shoulder in 4 places, and that damaged the nerves and left her with a paralysed left arm. She talks about how, you know, her life was completely changed. She was really fit and active and couldn't do that. Found out about the Invictus Games, and then on the opening day went and won 2 golds in cycling and sprinting. There was also in the wheelchair tennis Paul Guest, who has PTSD amongst his injuries, was unsettled by the sound of a helicopter, so his partner Edwin Vermetten took him to one side during the game and they started singing Frozen's Let It Go, and all the crowd joined in. Really special moment. And also the story of 15-month-old Labrador Tank, who broke protocol this week by accompanying powerlifter Ben Farnazo onto the stage. He wasn't supposed to do it, but Tank would not let Ben go because Ben was really upset by all the noise and excitement, and he accompanied him onto the stage. Ben set a new personal best, and Tank is one of 12 service dogs at the games doing amazing things. So yeah, just the stories that have come out of this Invictus Games have been incredible, and testament again to how powerful sport is. And, you know, big thanks to everyone who's been organising that and been involved in that.
That's why I love the Invictus Games, because you wouldn't get stories like that anywhere else, really, would you? Moving on to myself and my news story, and the first news item up from me is regarding tennis player Caroline Wozniacki, who has revealed she's been suffering with rheumatoid arthritis for the past few months. The Australian Open champion was diagnosed before this summer's US Open, but has been able to play through it up until now. Her season has come to an end after she was knocked out of the WTA finals on Thursday, and her plan is to use the off-season to come up with some sort of plan over how to manage the illness, which generally causes swelling of the joints and also fatigue. The Danish player obviously said she was shocked by the diagnosis, and it remains to be seen just how much it will affect her long-term. Obviously, it's another spanner in the works she has to deal with, but I suppose she could inspire a lot of people in the long run if she perseveres and pulls through. And then you look at the likes of Venus Williams, who also has to manage a condition as well while she competes. And it's really a good platform for Caroline Wozniacki to become more than a tennis player, I think. So there's a lot of opportunity there for her, providing she, of course, finds the right course of treatment during the off-season as well. So next up, Niki Kovacs.
Great, so I'm going to kick off with 6 Day just because it's on at the moment and it's the first in the series. So last night was quite a thrilling watch in the women's. I don't know if anybody managed to see that.
Don't talk to me about last night.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So, brief rundown, I was supposed to go with my dad and then he started throwing up when we were about to go. So,
and then Ticketmaster sent him an email asking how it went.
Just Ticketmaster rubbing it in for me this morning.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress.
Yeah. So last night was the kickoff of the women's, and Kirsten Wilt is obviously amazing and has put in like a really good performance. You can definitely see how she is where she is. She's just like a master of tactics and has played everything right so far. And other people to watch is Georgia Baker. She's in the Australian team. She's also doing really, really well. We've got some of the GB girls there. So our, like Katie Archibald, I think Laura Trott, I'm not too sure, but some of the girls are out doing the World Cup in Canada at the moment, so they are not going to be at 6 Day. I know there was mention earlier in the year saying Katie Archibald would be riding, but she unfortunately isn't, because she is going to win some medals at World Cup. No pressure.
They won our team pursuit gold this morning, actually, so they've already got one of them.
So,
yeah,
it was
incredible.
worth the trip then, wasn't it? Briefly, since you were someone that did 6 Day 2 years ago, just as a rider, what is it like to be part of that?
Oh, it's amazing. The atmosphere is always incredible at 6 Day. Whether you're watching, whether you're racing, it's just an incredible event, and it's just seamless. The effort that they've put into it is just incredible.
Exactly. Next news story.
back to me, and an exciting new initiative has been launched by British Rowing this week called #SheRows. It was launched by Helen Glover at Bisham Abbey, where I work, so 2 of my work colleagues went along to help out with the launch and found themselves splashed all over British Rowing and Helen Glover's newsfeed. So the initiative is designed to get 10,000 women taking part in indoor rowing by 2021. So with the hectic lifestyles we lead and a lot more women leading very busy lifestyles, it could be quite difficult to find time to do exercise. But Helen Glover herself, a mum who had to take a break from exercise, found that, having an indoor rowing machine in her house was a way of keeping fit, keeping active. And, this is just showing that women, you don't have to go to the gym, you don't have to go out for a run, you can do exercise in your own home. And it just gets them active, gets them back into sport. And, if they really enjoy it, they can go and do indoor rowing championships, so they can go outdoor rowing, all that sort of thing. So fantastic initiative. Getting more women in sport is a great thing. Can't wait to see how it progresses.
Something we bang on about quite a lot on this show. Second news item from me is a long-running story that we haven't actually touched upon that much on this show, and we probably should have, in all truth. That is the latest in the ongoing debacle happening within USA Gymnastics right now. On October the 16th, so it was a couple of days after our last episode, Mary Bono resigned as interim boss of the organisation after her appointment was questioned by Olympic champions Simone Biles and Ali Raceman. Bono had been in that position for 4 days. The 56-year-old was criticised after appearing to oppose the Nike advertising campaign featuring Colin Kaepernick, who of course is the ex-NFL player who kick-started the protests during the playing of the US national anthem. However, Bono had also previously worked for a law firm which represented USA Gymnastics and its ex-team doctor Larry Nassar during that sex abuse scandal. Nassar, as I'm sure people know, is currently serving more than 300 years in jail for abusing gymnasts. 2 of his victims do include Biles and Raceman. So what did Bono actually say about Kaepernick? Well, she had tweeted a picture of herself colouring in the Nike logo on her golf shoe. And she said, "With respect to Mr. Kaepernick, he nationally exercised his First Amendment right to kneel. I chose mine." Raceman's criticism of Bono was related to her role at the law firm, although she never actually was involved in the Nassar case. But all this comes after Bono's predecessor, Kerry Perry, resigned on September the 9th. In September rather, and that was 9 months into the role after she was criticised of her handling of the Nassar scandal. So it's all a mess. Nassar has serving 60 years in prison on child pornography charges, 175 years on sexual abuse charges, and a further 40 to 125 years for molesting young gymnasts. So the fallout of that horrific case continues, and USA Gymnastics really has to sort itself out top to bottom.
But they can start doing that at the Worlds this week, where the US are expected to win a load of medals, so that might detract.
And Simone Biles is in hospital 24 hours before that is due to start with kidney stones.
She's still going to compete.
She's still going to go and compete.
She is one incredible young woman.
Absolutely,
really is.
Yes. So, next news story.
Great. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Tour de France. They've just released the route for next year, which is going to be a climbers' haven, it's coined. And so that will hopefully, hopefully, play into the hands of the likes of Froome. It should be a really good stage because he's aiming to win his 5th stage and get that record. So who knows what could happen there, but they've shortened the TT, so that's also going to be quite difficult. And there is a gravel section at the top of one of the 20% climbs, so it's not going to be an easy tour at all. I think a lot of the riders have come forward and have started speaking about how difficult next year is going to be. The race director has also pushed back on the fact that he's not in favour of riders using power meters, which is a little bit counterproductive if you are trying to clean up the sport and make sure that riders are complying and not cheating. So I don't know how that is helpful. It's more I would say in favour of the spectators more than anything else, just to keep things a little bit more impromptu, a little bit less predictable, removing race radios potentially in some of the stages, and then if they don't have power meters, which makes absolutely no difference. But the thing is, if you tie that into how the sport has gone through so much in terms of doping accusations and with WADA over the past few months, if you took power meters away, like using weights and power is the easiest way to check that a rider isn't cheating. So not sure if that's a great idea.
Watch that one play out and
Yeah.
see what the actual overreaction is.
But that's the great thing about having a high-level athlete on the show with us, is that we wouldn't have that insight otherwise.
Exactly.
So that's something for us to look out for in the future. But
Yeah, exactly. We'll keep an eye out on that. Next news story is up from
final news story from me. Another piece of fairly good news is that a 5th female manager has been appointed in the FA Women's Super League, as Vicky Jepson has been appointed as the Liverpool manager on a full-time basis. She had been in a caretaker role since Neil Redfern suddenly resigned a few weeks ago. The club has been in turmoil in recent times. They lost a lot of players at the end of last season. There have been financial issues. Obviously, the coming and going of Redfern, a brand new team being assembled for this season. But Jepson has been a stalwart of the club. She's been there for over 10 years. She's worked her way up. She's earned all her badges. She's now been appointed as the full-time manager, to a lot of love from the players on social media, which is great. Since she got in caretaker charge, actually Liverpool have seen an upturn in form as well and performances. So all seems to finally be going in the right direction for Liverpool. And it's also just a great advert for female coaches. You've got 5 of the 11 teams in the WSL managed by women. Emma Hayes at Chelsea, Chelsea all conquering last season. Hope Powell at Brighton. Hope Powell, obviously, former England women's coach. Kelly Chambers at Reading, a really young, upcoming, exciting coach who I think can go really far. And Tanya Oxtoby, the Australian in charge at Bristol City. So proving that women can actually take charge of football clubs and do really well with them. So hopefully there'll be more and more coming in the future. Hopefully the next England women's football manager will be a female, and before long perhaps we could see men being managed by women, who knows. But it's a good start, and cannot wait to see how Jepson gets on with Liverpool.
Exactly. Annoyingly, Liverpool appointed Jepson the day after I filed a piece for the Offside Rule pod that was going to be released on Friday afternoon, just after I'd written about our Chelsea-Liverpool game this weekend. So a little annoyed with the timing from my perspective, but I'll look past that. Next news story for me, and tying in with the sort of women's football theme, last week the current England women's football manager Phil Neville called out Instagram after England and Chelsea midfielder Karen Carney was abused by a user on the social media site. Neville shared the post that Carney was sent, which wished cancer, leukemia and rape on the player. The abuse came after Chelsea's Champions League victory against Fiorentina, with Carney scoring the only goal in the game. Former Manchester United and Everton player Neville wrote, "A message sent to one of my Lionesses players last night. Absolutely disgraceful." He went on to ask Instagram, "Are you going to do something about it?" Obviously, that raises questions again over sanctions you can actually dish out to abhorrent users on social media sites. But it's a sad fact of life, really, that if you are in the public domain in any capacity, abuse is going to come your way, be it sexist abuse if you're a women's player, for example, or all manner of colourful offensive language that can get thrown at you. I've had it in my role as a journalist. I was called a mug several times this week by one nice user, which is nice, as well as some other colourful words that have been used to describe me in the past. So cheers, social media.
Did you see the post Neville shared a couple of days later from another unnamed player as well, which was a similar death
horrible
threat, and then said, "Oh, will this get me a headline on BBC Sport?" And it's just incredible to think that people actually think this is a good idea in some way.
It always relates to a tipping point, though, doesn't it? Because it'll be like one person will chip in, and the next moment, like someone else will chip in because they'll see that person chipping in. It becomes like a mob mentality.
So many times than I care to count. It's that blanket anonymity that you can use on social media, and sometimes people use it as a real tool to just say what they want.
But I think it's also the safety in numbers thing. People feel maybe a bit more confident to say those things because they feel backed up, or they use their social leverage, which in a way is actually, let's be honest, weaker. So It's just like
It just makes me glad that I work for still quite a minority sport, so the abuse we get is really, really minimal, and it's only ever the 1 or 2 cases, and it's people just telling us that we're not very good at our jobs, whereas I'd hate to work for the FA or a football club, because the amount of stuff you must have to read and see must be just horrible.
Exactly. I'll briefly share a story I wrote a few months ago about a guy who got jailed for I think 18 months after he stabbed someone in the leg. He also had a knuckle duster on him, I think.
Oh,
well.
he
got
sounds
done for
great.
that. Yeah, and his mate sent me a personal message on Facebook afterwards, calling me out as the disrespectful one for writing about him. And he said one day he will teach me what respect is. So I'm still waiting for that day.
Brutal.
So
it's amazing.
Beware.
I had a rider, a very, very young rider, take me out in a race once, and I was in hospital getting surgery, and I had messages on Facebook in Messenger from her dad. Who had just sent me a ream of abuse in Spanish. It was like,
did you understand it?
No, I had to use Google Translate, and I was on a lot of morphine, so it really wasn't good.
That's the best story we've ever had on this show.
I enjoyed that one. One final news story, if you have one.
I don't, but all I will say is that it looks like in terms of WADA, there's rumbles in that front again. I think
which
cycling,
we've mentioned plenty of times. WADA rumbles.
It just seems like cycling is really getting gone through quite a rough patch again. It happens every now and then, but it just seems to be a sport which gets a lot of attention. On the WADA front.
Does that really disappoint you as a cyclist?
It does, very much so, because the fact that people are even cheating on lower levels, on amateur levels, there's been quite a few people which have been caught, like youngsters and also masters races. It's just really discouraging. It just makes you wonder if, you could be doing like a national race or like a lower level race or a local race, and you're just actually not sure if the people you're competing against are 100% clean.
So that's something I don't think people would realise or even think about, to be honest, is we obviously all focus at the elite level and what might be happening at the elite level, but talking from an amateur perspective, that's even more worrying, I think.
Well, it's just, like people aren't tested. Like you don't do a local crit race and they say, hey, you
come on over.
Come over. You have to, you have to be tested. It's just, it just seems crazy to me that, there are certain national races that aren't even checked.
Exactly. Anyway, on that positive note, we will finish up the news roundup section. More after this. Follow SportSpiel Pod on Twitter, Facebook, and on Instagram, or go to our website sportspielonline.com. Moving on then to this week's discussion topic, and this time around we are focusing on rugby player Christian Wade. The Wasps winger is the third most prolific try scorer in Premiership history, but he has decided at the age of 27 to quit rugby in order to pursue a career in American football. Wade is by no means the only rugby player to try and make the switch to the NFL. Christian Scotland-Williamson and Alex Gray have become part of the practice squads at the Pittsburgh Steelers and Atlanta Falcons, while former Saracens man Hayden Smith played for the New York Jets for 18 months from 2012. It is expected that Christian Wade will aim for the NFL via the league's International Player Pathway program. That program saw the likes of Australian Jordan Mailata and Nigerian refugee F.A. Obada, who grew up in foster care here in London, by the way, becoming the first product of that program when they made the final rosters for the Philadelphia Eagles and the Carolina Panthers respectively earlier this year. So, I begin by nicking a phrase from former England back Hugo Monnier. Has Christian Wade, a man with just one England cap, by the way, has he been let down by rugby?
Well, going along something else, what Monnier said, Wade is coachable. Wade obviously doesn't have the assets that the coaches think require him to make international rugby, so why has no one tried to upskill him? That is the question Monnier asked, and that is a very good question. Obviously, he's such a prolific try scorer. Being a Wasps fan, I'm incredibly biased anyway. Watching him and Vandel on the wing a couple of years back was very, very special. Just watching those two scoring tries for fun. There's clearly something about him that Eddie Jones doesn't like, but instead of, giving him something to go away and work on, he's just left him high and dry, no interaction. You've got a lot of players who are in the pecking order above him. The fact is Chris Ashton was exiled from the team and has got back in above him, despite the fact that it's well known Eddie Jones hates him. Well, hate's a strong word, doesn't like him as a person, and yet he's got in over Christian Wade. So he's turned around, he's got an American girlfriend, he likes the sport, and he said, you know what, I'm going to go and try and make it somewhere else. And fair play to him, because it doesn't look like he's going to be in the World Cup squad next year or anywhere near it. So why not go and try something different?
Well, I'll bring in Monnier again and his quote, which is, "I could only dream of doing the stuff Christian Wade can do. I blame the coaches who haven't given him the chance or not upskilled him. He is a potential international superstar."
He's incredible. He's so quick, so powerful for such a small man. But again, that was another question that was posed this week. Has he not been selected because of size? In the world of rugby now, you have to be 6 foot plus and built like a certain type of outdoor toilet to be able to succeed. And Christian Wade is absolutely huge, but he's really, really small. He's about my height, and apart from Shane Williams and Ronan O'Gara in recent times, outside of the scrum half position, what short people have you seen exceed in the international game? None, because they're just not picked. And again, it could be just unlucky that he's got the genes where he is short, and that has played against him.
I think you can go against the whole genes or selection criteria, though. I mean, like Mark Cavendish seems to be doing pretty well. They told him that he wouldn't do very well.
Usain Bolt was too tall for sprinting, wasn't he, originally? And look what Usain Bolt's done.
But then I come back to a quote from Tom Vandel, which he actually said a few months ago, and this was quite an interesting insight. He said, "Rugby is not played on a PowerPoint. It's played on a pitch 15v15, and you want the best athletes, the best skill set and players who can break the mould and go and do something. Christian can do that." That's clearly having an opinion on the way internationally they look at the game and saying it's too much based on the statistics, on looking at things like the genes, not actually at what they just go out and do on a day-to-day basis. And if sports such as athletics and cycling were done like that, then we wouldn't have seen Usain Bolt, we wouldn't have seen Mark Cavendish succeed. So clearly Tom Vandel thinks that the way high-level rugby is done is far too much based on statistics and data, and it's just interesting.
Is that also down to the selection criteria? Because Christian Wade has been speaking out around that quite a bit, like the whole public school thing versus, a lot of the players being selected from private schools, and obviously that is a huge funding gap.
That was one of my big points, really, because that's something he's mentioned back in August, that rugby still suffers from a white public school image, and that he wanted to set up a foundation as well to give state school players more of a chance. He went to a grammar school, which he had to pass an exam for, and according to the Independent School Council, only 7% of children in England under the age of 16 are private schooled, but 68% of players in the England squad for the 2015 Rugby World Cup went to private school. That's 21 out of 31. But then you look at the NFL, and 70% of the players in that league are black. That's according to the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport. That obviously doesn't correspond in any way at a management level or a coaching level, and that's a wider debate we can have another day. But is part of the move to the NFL then because he would feel more at home in that environment?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about it like that. I know he's got an American girlfriend who's desperate to go back to America, so I'm sure that was partly to do with it. But it could well be he might feel more comfortable amongst people he can feel more related to and come from a similar background, albeit in a different country. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how he does over there.
Well, as the white, privately educated person on this podcast, hello. I've seen. I never took part in rugby because, frankly, I'm terrible at it. But I've seen the amount of emphasis, certainly in my school, placed on rugby and the type of people that it attracted as well. And it was. I remember our rugby club was run by this huge South African whose life was literally all about rugby. And
It's
he was
a national
properly
sport,
passionate about it. Exactly.
in case you're wondering.
That also brings me back to my dissertation, which was on South Africa and rugby and football, and the demographics in it, because football was very much kind of the black people's sport. Rugby is still very much the white person's sport. So I wonder if we're kind of having that same, not on the same level, but as someone who's originally from South Africa as well, this is kind of where you come in. Are we starting to have that same sort of debate where it's about trying to make rugby more inclusive, really, and make it more comfortable for people to, and give people from all sorts of backgrounds more of a chance to actually make it in the sport?
Well, I think it's definitely important that all sports are accessible, like not only rugby, but other sports which are deemed like a white person's sports. Even cycling, I think, suffers from the same stigma. So in terms of growing up, I know rugby is absolutely huge. It was just a standard in all of our schools, whether they be public, whether they be private. It's just everybody, all the guys played rugby. It's just a standard thing. So the fact that there's such a huge difference between public schools and private schools here, and the availability and accessibility to, a sport like rugby is quite different. It's quite alien to me. It doesn't really make sense to me, because I'm just like, well, it's a sport. You want all kids from all different backgrounds are going to be talented in different ways, and you want to be able to tap into that as much as possible.
I think that's the thing with state schools across the board, really, is that not just rugby, but more sports need to be accessible to state school kids. That's why I think football's so easy to play. You just play it on the street, pick up a ball, and off you go. But a lot of state schools won't have access to rugby pitches, to rugby facilities, to other facilities for any other sport. I come back to fencing. Not many state school kids will have a chance to go to a fencing cell and fence. Whereas because I went to private school, I did, which is why I got into fencing.
Slightly differently. So I went to a state school like Christian Wade. I had to pass the 11 plus to get into a grammar school. We were a slightly different grammar school in that when it came to sport, we like to think we were a private school. So our main focus for the boys was rugby. Played a lot of rugby, but anyone was encouraged to play. It was a very diverse school. We had people from all different backgrounds who'd passed the 11 plus, and I played alongside the likes of so many different types of people, and it was great. And we played cricket. The boys actually weren't allowed to play football. It was only ever the girls who could play football, not the boys. But all the other schools around us, whether they be grammar schools if you passed 11 plus, or non-selective schools, if you hadn't passed, their main focus was on sports like football, because that was, what most people were interested in, and it was the cheapest sport for them to run. So we were sort of in a league of our own when it came to rugby, and we ended up playing all the private schools. And we turn up with players from all different backgrounds, a bit of a rabble sometimes if you struggle to scrape a squad together, but people whose parents were immigrants to this country, or grandparents, and some people like myself whose heritage comes from England, all sorts of players, and then you play against completely white opposition. It was just very strange, and it's just a shame that sports like rugby and football, not rugby and football, rugby and cricket, that could be so easily accessible to so many people when it comes to schools, just aren't provided for.
Mm-hmm. I'll bring this back full circle to Christian Wade, and take more of a sort of an NFL standpoint from this. We look at the London Games that are held in the city at Wembley, and once they actually finish Tottenham's new stadium, they'll be held at Tottenham Stadium as well. And the constant rumblings about a London team coming to the league. We look at Shahid Khan, who's the owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, as well as Fulham Football Club, and his attempts to buy Wembley, although he's dropped that bid for now. Is NFL, or the NFL, starting to take over from a lot of other sports in this country as one of the most popular?
I hope not, but that's because I don't like American football.
You might not like it, but the popularity
seeing the numbers of people who are going to these matches in London, the numbers of people who follow it on TV as well, it's growing hugely in popularity, and I wouldn't be surprised before long if we have some sort of professional, semi-professional NFL league in this country, if we don't already, that we don't already know of.
Yeah. I have no idea what your association was with NFL, if you watch it or...
Basically none.
Yeah. That's the thing, I watch it occasionally, but I started watching it because everyone around me suddenly seemed to get into it and engrossed with it. It's a long investment of time, I will say that.
It's not so bad when you're watching. So when I was cheerleading at uni, we went along to a couple of the men's NFL or the men's American football games, and then it's not too bad when it's at an amateur level because you don't have all the adverts and everything, and the play is fairly quick and the breaks aren't too long. But yeah, watching it on TV when you've got advert breaks every 40 seconds or so, it's a long day. It's almost as bad as watching a game of cricket.
But it does look quite glossy.
That's the thing, that the occasion, I think it's
Yeah.
quite easy for people to get caught up in that with the fandom, and then you have the cheerleaders on the side. You've got what happens during the national anthem.
You've got the half-time concerts and all that.
And then you look at the protests. We mentioned Colin Kaepernick earlier in the show, and the backlash, if you like, that's caused, and Donald Trump wading in. The power of the NFL, you can't really argue against. And now it's coming over to this country as well. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before we see a full-time London team, probably based at Wembley. One last question to round this all off. Will Christian Wade make it?
I had an in-depth conversation with a colleague this week who loves his American football, and he says no.
Did he say why?
Yeah, he did. So Christian Wade, he said he's going to take at least a year, if not longer, to actually learn the skills of the sport and actually become, decent enough to be able to play a full game. Like a similar way to Usain Bolt in football. It's going to take him a long time to develop the skills to actually really make it. By that time, he'll be 28, 29, coming through the program, and yeah, he's a valuable asset to have, but there's only one position he can play, which is running back. And are they going to pick a 28, 29-year-old who has only been playing for a couple of years, or are they going to pick a 21, 22-year-old who's got a big future ahead of them, who's been playing all their life? And he says they're going to pick the one who's younger, who's been playing all their life. There's a chance, like the other rugby players, that he could get on a practice squad, but the chances of him actually making it are very small. And if you think about the number of people who play American football, it's difficult enough to become a professional footballer in this country, and you've got a sixth of the population. So becoming a professional American footballer with all the other odds stacked against him, it would be incredible if he does it. And I wish him all the best, but it's an uphill struggle he'll face.
I'm going to go with yes. And the reason I'm going to do that is because if you look at all the historical skills transfer, I'm quite hopeful. You look at Katie Martin, she's done really, really well. Sinead Reid, another one that's done really, really well. Alex Spratz, who's just moved from rugby over to becoming a sprinter. He's actually in 6-day at the moment. He's doing really, really well. And you look at the criteria of things that need to be met for skills transfer. There's about 6 items on that list. 2 of them that stand out the most is skill and speed. So I think in order for him to transition, he must have had skill and speed for them to even consider him.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel to find our episodes and other video content. Right, that is nearly it for this latest episode of the podcast. As ever, you can follow us on social media. All of our handles, Twitter, Facebook, and on Instagram, they are all SportSpiel Pod. And of course, you can email us feedback or whatever's on your mind. Our email address is sportspielpod@gmail.com. Some final messages before we pop off. There will be a special episode on the 31st of October with Alex Pask, who is the founder of the Mintridge Foundation, and she is nominated in Sunday Times Sportswoman of the Year Awards in the Grassroots Awards category. So I'm recording that on Monday with her. So unless I fall over and break a leg or something, that will be out on the 31st of October.
Touch wood, Al.
Touch wood. I'm touching wood. The awards themselves, they're on November the 1st. So that should be quite an interesting night to see who does come away with that award. We are back. I'm going to talk to myself a little bit because Will's popped off to the toilet. But we're back next for a proper episode on November the 17th. People on our social media will also have seen that I paid a visit to British Judo and their Centre of Excellence on Wednesday. Recorded 2 interviews from that day, and we will let people know when we're going to release those in due course. Lastly, thank you so much for coming on as a guest presenter.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
What's next in the pipeline for you? Have we got anything that we can see you in the near future?
Nothing as yet. At the moment, I am just enjoying a bit of chilling out time.
Chilling out time is good.
Yeah,
we love chilling out
completely.
time.
I'm enjoying it a little bit too much.
Exactly. Yeah. But no, that's obviously a delight to get you back onto the show, and thank you so much for doing the interview as well. And I'm sure
it was great.
there'll
Ryan
be more
was,
to come.
Ryan was fantastic, and go Ryan! Come on,
Go Ryan.
You're like day 12. Keep going.
Keep pedaling.
Yeah.
Pedal as you listen to this. And with that, we have come to an end of today's show. It's a big thank you from me, from Will, and from Niki. Let us know what your thoughts are of the episode, but for now, listeners, it's goodbye, and we will see you very soon.